My new daughter-in-law Tiffany stopped me just as I was about to take my seat, her voice slicing through the happy chatter of the wedding reception. "Don't sit with us," she said, loud enough for the entire head table to hear. "You'll embarrass the family." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp, as dozens of eyes turned to stare at me, this old woman in a simple blue dress. The shame was a physical thing, a hot wave that washed over my face as I stood there, frozen. Friend. My heart shattered into a million pieces right there on that polished dance floor. But before I tell you what my own son did next, a moment that felt even crueler than his wife's words, please do an old woman a kindness. Tap subscribe so you're here to see what happens when a mother decides she's been pushed too far. Tiffany's smile was tight and triumphant. She had drawn her line in the sand, and I was on the wrong side of it. This perfect party, this beautiful celebration of my son's future, it was all paid for by my life's work, by sacrifices she couldn't possibly imagine. But in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the look on my son David's face. I searched his eyes for help, for any sign of the boy I raised. But what I saw in them wasn't anger at his wife. It was something far, far worse. It was fear. Pure, helpless fear. My son David just stood there, trapped between the wife he had just promised his life to and the mother who had given him that life. He wouldn't even look at me. Instead, he looked at the tablecloth, his knuckles white as he gripped his chair. "Mum, please," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Not now. It's just wedding stress." Wedding stress. The excuse felt like a slap, a cheap and easy way out. Tiffany's smirk widened. She had won. She knew he wouldn't stand up to her. Not here. Not now. Just then, a wedding planner with a plastic smile and a clipboard appeared at my elbow, as if summoned. "Right this way, ma'am," she said, her tone sickeningly sweet as she placed a hand on my arm to guide me away. She was escorting me away from my family like I was a problem to be solved. Every head turned to watch me as I was led away from the laughter and the lights, each step feeling like a mile. The whispers followed me across the room, little daggers in my back. I could feel the pity, the judgment, the morbid curiosity of strangers. She wasn't taking me to another family table. She was leading me to a small, forgotten table in the darkest corner of the room, right by the swinging doors of the kitchen. But it wasn't the isolation that made my blood run cold. It was what I saw waiting for me on the table. It was a single wilting carnation in a cheap glass vase. It was a deliberate insult, a symbol of how they saw me, a leftover, something to be discarded in a corner. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak, my back to the entire party. My view was of the kitchen doors, and every time they swung open, I got a blast of hot air and the smell of grease, a constant reminder that I was with the help, not the guests. I could hear the clatter of plates and the shouts of cooks, and beyond that, the distant sound of music and laughter from a world I was no longer a part of. I watched my son from across the room. I saw him toast his new bride. I saw him laugh with her wealthy father. He never once looked in my direction. The pain was so sharp it was hard to breathe. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born of wedding stress. This was calculated. The separate table, the flower, the planner swooping in. It was all planned. They didn't just want me out of the way. They wanted me to feel the full weight of my own insignificance. The music finally faded and guests began to leave. I sat there alone until the room was nearly empty, a ghost at a feast that was now over. I thought the night's humiliation was finally done. I was wrong. The worst part was yet to come. The worst part was the silence that followed. As the last of the guests trickled out, my son David finally walked over to my lonely table. He moved slowly, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the floor as if he was ashamed to look at me. He didn't come to rescue me or to rage at his new wife. He came to manage me. "Mum, I'm so sorry," he began, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. Tiffany. She gets overwhelmed. She wanted everything to be perfect. His excuse was so weak, so flimsy, it was insulting. He wasn't defending me, he was defending her. He was asking me to accept this humiliation, to swallow this pain, for the sake of her perfect day. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking as he finally met my gaze. The look in his eyes wasn't of a son, but of a zookeeper trying to calm a dangerous animal. "Don't make a scene. Let's just get through tonight. We can talk tomorrow." He wasn't asking for my forgiveness, he was asking for my silence. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a dismissal than a comfort, and then walked away, returning to his bride's side. I watched him go, and I knew in that moment that I had lost him. I picked up my purse, my hands steady, and walked out of that reception hall alone, the silence in my car a deafening roar. I thought I had hit rock bottom that night, but I had no idea what the morning light would reveal. I woke up the next morning with a dull ache in my chest that had nothing to do with sleep. The world felt grey and muted. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at an old photo of David as a little boy, his gap-toothed smile a painful memory of a time when I was his whole world. Just then, my phone buzzed with a notification. The wedding photographer had posted a sneak peek album online. My heart gave a painful lurch. Maybe there would be one good picture, one moment captured that proved I was still a part of his life. With trembling fingers, I opened the link. The first photo was of Tiffany looking like a princess, then David smiling at her, then the two of them kissing. I scrolled faster. A photo of the first dance, the cake cutting, Tiffany with her parents, their smiles wide and predatory. I felt a knot form in my stomach. In a few of the wider shots, I could just see the sleeve of my blue dress at the edge of the frame, but I was never fully in it. Then I saw it. The final photo. The big family portrait taken at the altar right after the ceremony. Tiffany and David were in the centre, her parents on one side and on the other. A strange empty space right next to my son. A space where I had been standing. They hadn't just cut me out of a few pictures. They had used software to digitally remove me from the most important photo of the day. This wasn't an oversight. It was a message, and it meant I had to send one of my own. Staring at that empty space where I was supposed to be, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The tears that had been threatening to fall all morning simply dried up. The deep, aching sadness that had settled in my bones began to burn, transforming into something else entirely. A cold, quiet, and perfectly clear resolve. The grieving mother who had been publicly shamed was gone, and in her place was a woman Tiffany had never met. A woman she should be very, very afraid of. I had spent my entire life building a successful business from nothing, a commercial sanitation empire that cleaned up the biggest messes in the city. I dealt with facts, with logistics, with problems that needed to be solved. And I now realized that Tiffany and her perfect wealthy family were just another mess that needed to be cleaned up. Who were these people, really? What gave them the right to look down on me, to erase me, to take my son and turn him against me with such ease? They believed I was just a simple, uneducated old woman who scrubbed floors for a living. They had underestimated me. They had counted on my shame, my love for my son, to keep me silent and weak. I sat down at my small kitchen table, the morning sun glinting off my laptop screen. It was time to find out exactly who the Miller family was. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a CEO, and I was about to launch the most important investigation of my life. My laptop screen cast a cool blue light in my otherwise dark living room. My investigation didn't start with anger. It started with business. I typed the name of my new in-laws company, Miller Properties, into the search bar. It looked impressive at first glance, a glossy website with pictures of sprawling office buildings and luxury homes. It was a perfect mask, designed to project wealth and success. But I had learned long ago that the most pristine surfaces can hide the most dirt. I wasn't going to confront them as Carol, the wounded mother-in-law. They would dismiss me. I had to approach them from an angle they would respect: money. I used a separate business line I kept for acquisitions and dialed the number on their website. When a receptionist answered, I didn't ask for Mr. Miller. I used a voice I hadn't used in years, a voice of pure, unshakable authority. "This is Catherine Hale," I said, using the name on one of my holding companies. "I represent a private equity group looking to invest 8 figures into a new commercial real estate portfolio. I was told Mr. Miller is the man to speak to." I was throwing out a bait so juicy, a man like him couldn't possibly ignore it. The silence on the other end of the line was short. When Tiffany's father, Mr. Miller, finally came on the line, his voice wasn't calm and professional. It was dripping with an eagerness that bordered on desperation, and I knew instantly that I had him on the hook. "Miss Hale, yes." "A pleasure to speak with you," Mr. Miller said, his voice a little too loud, a little too friendly. He talked a big game, throwing around impressive-sounding terms about market projections and high-yield returns. He was a good salesman. I had to give him that. But he was selling a product I knew he didn't have. I let him talk for a few minutes, let him build his own trap before I made my move. "It all sounds very promising, Mr. Miller," I said, my tone cool and professional. "To proceed, my partners will need to see your standard financials, a list of current assets, your profit and loss statements for the last 2 years, and your debt-to-equity ratio." They were the most basic requests any real investor would make. The confident flow of his words immediately stopped. There was a pause, a split second of panic that travelled right through the phone line. Of course," he stammered, recovering quickly, but the damage was done. "My assistant is just compiling the latest quarterly reports. I'll have her send them right over." A truly successful man would have had those numbers ready. A desperate man would try to sell you the dream before you had a chance to check the foundations. He promised to email me everything by the end of the day, but I knew he wouldn't. This wasn't just a red flag, it was a fire alarm. It was time to stop digging for dirt myself and bring in the professionals. The next morning, I made a different kind of phone call. My company, Miller Sanitation, has a few necessary expenses. One of them is a man named Frank. Frank is a private investigator, the best in the business. He's discreet, thorough, and he finds out things that people want to keep buried. I use him to vet my high-level employees, the ones who will have access to the finances of my multi-million-dollar company. I trusted him completely. "Frank," I said when he answered, "I have a new job for you." There was no small talk. There never was with Frank. "I need a full financial and background profile on a family, the Millers, first names Arthur and Joyce, and their daughter Tiffany." I spelled out their names for him, my voice even and steady. "I want to know everything, Frank," I continued. "Every business they've ever owned, every loan they've ever taken, every lawsuit they've ever faced. I want to know where every single penny comes from and where it all goes." He simply said, "It will be done," and told me his fee. I transferred the money from my personal account without a second thought. 3 days later, a thick manila envelope with no return address appeared on my doorstep. I took it inside, my hands surprisingly steady as I poured myself a glass of water. I didn't know what I was about to find, but I knew whatever was in that envelope would change everything. I slit open the manila envelope with a kitchen knife, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't a short summary. It was a stack of papers nearly an inch thick. The first page was a summary from Frank, and the first sentence hit me like a physical blow. "Subject family Miller is functionally insolvent with overwhelming debt." But the summary was nothing compared to the raw data that followed. I spread the pages across my kitchen table. There were bank statements showing maxed-out credit cards and overdrawn accounts. There were copies of lawsuits from contractors who were never paid and business partners who had been cheated. The glossy headquarters of Miller Properties was a rented office in a building that was half empty, and their beautiful, sprawling home. It was a rental too, and the last page in the stack was a copy of a third and final eviction notice. Their entire life was a lie, a carefully constructed illusion of wealth built on a mountain of other people's money. Tiffany hadn't been born with a silver spoon in her mouth. She had been raised by two professional con artists who had perfected the art of living a lie. The pages fell from my fingers onto the table. This wasn't just a case of snobbery. It was a long con, a trap. And my son, my David, was standing right in the middle of it. I had to get to him before it was too late. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, protective fury. I grabbed my phone and dialed David's number. Every second it rang felt like an eternity. I had to get to him, to warn him before Tiffany could sink her claws in any deeper. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice wary and distant. "Mum," he said, and the single word was heavy with the space between us. "David, you need to listen to me," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm and even. I couldn't sound frantic or accusing. I had to sound like a source of facts, not a hysterical mother. "I know you're angry with me. We can talk about that later. Right now, you are in danger. I found something out about Tiffany's family. Something serious." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel his hesitation through the phone. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "I'm not going to explain it over the phone," I said firmly. "Meet me, the coffee shop on Main Street. 1 hour. Please, David. As your mother, I am begging you to just hear what I have to say." I heard him sigh, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Fine," he said. 1 hour. I printed copies of the most damning pages from the report and put them in my purse. I was about to show my son that his new life was a lie, and I had no idea if our relationship would survive it. The little bell on the coffee shop door chimed and David walked in. He looked tired, and he didn't hug me when he got to the table. He just sat down, his arms crossed over his chest in a wall of defensiveness. "Okay, I'm here," he said. "What's so important?" I didn't say a word. I simply opened my purse, took out the stack of papers, and slid them across the table toward him. "Read this, David," I said softly. He sighed, annoyed, but he picked up the first page. I watched his face as he read. I saw his defensive posture slowly melt away, replaced by confusion, then shock. His eyes scanned the documents, the eviction notice, the lawsuit summaries, the staggering credit card debt listed in black and white. His face grew pale. He licked his lips, his hands starting to tremble slightly as he shuffled through the papers, the truth of them undeniable. He finally looked up from the evidence, his eyes wide and lost, and for the first time since the wedding, he looked like my son again. I don't understand," he whispered, his new wedding ring seeming to weigh down his hand. The truth was a harsh, cold light, and in that moment, he couldn't hide from it. I thought I had broken through to him. I thought he finally saw the truth. But I had underestimated the power of the woman he went home to that night, and the poison she was about to pour in his ear. I imagine my son David went home that day with the papers in his hand and righteous anger in his heart. I picture him walking through the door of the expensive apartment I'd helped them get, ready to confront the woman who had lied to him. He would have placed the evidence on the table, demanding an explanation, his voice shaking with betrayal. He was a good man, an honest man, and he would have expected the truth. But David was playing checkers, and he had just walked into a grandmaster's chess match. Tiffany didn't deny it. A good liar never denies the undeniable. Instead, she collapsed. She burst into a storm of perfectly crafted tears, her shoulders shaking as she confessed her terrible secret. She told him the debt was real, but that it was because her kind, trusting father had been cheated by a vicious business partner years ago. She claimed her family was ruined, and she had kept it a secret from him because she was so deeply ashamed. "I didn't want you to think I was just some poor girl," she would have sobbed, looking up at him with wide, glistening eyes. "I was so scared of losing you, David. I love you so much." She wasn't denying the fire. She was just changing the story of who started it. And David, my kind-hearted, loving son, wanted desperately to believe the woman he had just married. In that moment, he stopped seeing the evidence in his hand and only saw the woman he had vowed to protect. And that's when she knew she had him. Once she had his sympathy, the tears slowed, replaced by a look of wounded, righteous anger. She had masterfully shifted from the villain of the story to the victim. Now it was time for her to create a new villain. David. Think about it, she said, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. How would your mother even find this information? These are private records. She must have hired someone. She spied on us. On me. I can see the scene so clearly. David, his mind already clouded by love and pity, looking confused. He hadn't even considered that. He was focused on the lie, not how it was discovered. Tiffany pressed her advantage. She's always been jealous of us, can't you see it? She said, grabbing his hand. She couldn't stand that you chose me over her. This isn't about protecting you, it's about controlling you. She is trying to break us up. She had laid the trap perfectly. He was no longer choosing between truth and lies. He was being forced to choose between his wife and his mother. She sealed her performance with one final devastating question, her voice a mere whisper. Who are you going to believe, David? Me, your wife, who was too scared to tell you the truth? Or your mother, who would do something this cruel and invasive to destroy our happiness? I didn't know it then. But in his heart, my son had already made his choice. My phone rang late that night. It was David. I answered with a hopeful, "Hello?" but was met with a cold silence that chilled me to the bone. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, stripped of all warmth, like a stranger was using my son's vocal cords. "Mom," he began, "I've made my decision. I'm standing with my wife, with Tiffany." The words knocked the air out of my lungs. "David, she's lying to you," I pleaded, but he cut me off. "What you did was wrong," he said, his voice quiet and firm with a conviction that wasn't his own. "You spied on her. You spied on me. You tried to ruin our marriage because you can't stand to see me happy with someone else. I can't have that toxicity in my life, in our life." Every word was a perfectly polished stone she had placed in his mouth for him to throw at me. Then came the final blow. "I'm asking you to stay away from us," he said, his voice void of all emotion. "Don't call, don't come by. We need space. Goodbye, Mum." He hung up the phone. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, the coldest sound I had ever heard. I had gone to save my son, and instead, I had lost him completely. In that moment, the fight was no longer just about Tiffany. It was about getting my son back, and I realized I would have to burn their entire world to the ground to do it. The dial tone was gone, but the silence it left behind was a roaring in my ears. The house felt huge and empty. Every corner held a memory of David, his first steps in the living room, his report card stuck to the fridge, the faint scar on the doorframe where he'd crashed his toy truck. He wasn't just my son. He was the entire focus of my life. And in a single, cold phone call, he was gone. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced my anger. Had I gone too far? Was I the jealous, controlling monster Tiffany had described? That first week was the longest of my life. I'd pick up my phone to call him, my thumb hovering over his name before the memory of his cold voice stopped me. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a deep, hollow grief. I had tried to expose a liar and had become the villain in my own son's story. They had won. They had isolated me, cut me off, and left me completely and utterly alone with my pain. The grief was a storm, but storms pass. And when it did, what was left wasn't doubt, but a terrifying clarity. My son had been brainwashed by a family of con artists. My emotional appeal had failed because they had already poisoned his heart against me. I realized I couldn't win this fight as a mother. I had to win it as a strategist. A week passed in that heavy silence. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It wasn't David. It was Tiffany's father, Arthur Miller, and his voice was as smooth and oily as a snake. "Carol, my dear, Joyce and I were so worried about you," Arthur said, his voice oozing fake concern. "Tiffany told us there was a bit of a misunderstanding." I do hope you're feeling all right. I could practically hear the smirk on his face. He wasn't calling to check on me. He was calling to see if my spirit was broken. I decided to give him the answer he wanted. It's been very difficult, Arthur, I said, my voice quiet and shaky. He made a few more meaningless, comforting sounds before he got to the real reason for his call. Well, what helps in times like these is focusing on the future, he said brightly. Specifically on David and Tiffany's future. Joyce and I have come across a once-in-a-lifetime family investment opportunity, a small real estate deal that's guaranteed to set the kids up for life. He spoke of guaranteed returns and exclusive access, words that desperate men use when they're selling nothing at all. They had cut me off from my son, and now, believing I was a lonely old woman, desperate to buy my way back into his life, they were coming for my money. My first instinct was to curse him and hang up, but then I stopped. An idea began to form, a cold and calculated plan. Tell me more, Arthur, I said, my voice soft with interest. I'd love to hear all about it. Arthur nearly choked on his own excitement. He couldn't believe his luck. He immediately suggested we all meet for coffee the next day so he and his wife, Joyce, could present the prospectus. When the time came, I didn't dress to impress. I did the opposite. I put on a pair of old slacks and a faded blouse, the kind of clothes a simple cleaning woman would wear. I didn't even bother to put on makeup. I had to look the part of the grieving, vulnerable mother they imagined me to be. My heart wasn't pounding with anger or fear. It was steady. My mind was sharp. This wasn't a family meeting, it was a counterintelligence operation. They thought they were luring a sad old woman into a financial trap. They had no idea that I was the one setting the trap. They were so blinded by their arrogance, so sure of my stupidity, that they couldn't see the truth. I walked into the fancy downtown coffee shop where we had agreed to meet. Arthur and Joyce were already there at a corner table, their faces glowing with greed. They looked me up and down, their expressions a mixture of pity and triumph as they took in my plain appearance. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A fool who was ready to be parted from her money. The trap was set. All I had to do now was let them walk right into it. Arthur Miller slid a glossy, leather-bound folder across the table. It looked expensive and official. Here are the details, he said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the cover. It's a pre-development opportunity for a boutique hotel, a guaranteed home run. I opened it and pretended to study the pages. They were filled with stock photos of smiling people in hard hats and complicated-looking charts with dramatic, upward-swooping arrows. It was all designed to look impressive to someone who knew nothing about business. I played my part perfectly. I squinted at the pages, a look of deep confusion on my face. "Oh my," I'd say. "That's a very big number." Joyce, Tiffany's mother, would pat my hand reassuringly. "Don't you worry about the details, Carol," she cooed. "That's what we're here for. All you need to know is that this will secure the children's future." They explained it all to me slowly, as if I were a child, their condescension so thick I could have cut it with a knife. They saw a simple, grieving woman, an easy mark. And I let them. I let them believe they were in complete control, that their plan was working perfectly. Finally, after they had finished their pitch, I took a deep breath and looked them in the eyes. "It sounds wonderful," I said, my voice full of false hope. "I'll do it. I'll give you the money. But there's just one little thing my financial advisor insists upon." The smiles on their faces tightened for a split second. A financial advisor? That was a complication they hadn't expected. I continued, my voice apologetic. "He's very old-fashioned, my Mr. Albright," I lied smoothly. "A real stickler for the rules. For an investment of this size, he requires that I get a personal promissory note. Just a simple letter, signed by you both, personally guaranteeing my investment and stating the name of the project it's for. It's just a formality for his records, you understand?" They looked at each other. I could see the gears turning in their heads. It was a risk, but I was about to give them the one thing that could override their caution. I'm prepared to wire $250,000, I said quietly, as soon as Mr. Albright has the letter. Their eyes widened. That much money, right there for the taking. Their greed won just as I knew it would. Of course! A formality! Arthur boomed, pulling a pen and a crisp sheet of paper from his briefcase. He scribbled a few sentences, outlining their fake hotel project and personally guaranteeing my investment, then signed his name with a flourish. Joyce signed her name right below his. They pushed the paper across the table to me. It wasn't just a letter. It was a signed, dated confession of fraud. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. I had their signatures. Now I needed their voices. Oh, thank you, I said, my voice overflowing with relief and gratitude. You've made me so happy. I'll call my advisor this afternoon. I started to gather my things, fumbling with my purse like a flustered old woman. As I went to stand, I accidentally knocked the purse off my lap, spilling my wallet, keys, and an old smartphone onto the floor. Oh, heavens, I'm so clumsy, I said, my face flushing with embarrassment. As I bent down to scoop everything up, with them patronizingly helping me, I did two things. First, I discreetly swiped my finger across my phone's screen, activating the voice recorder app. Second, as I stuffed everything else back into my purse, I missed the phone, leaving it on the seat of the booth, partially hidden by a napkin I'd pushed over it. It was a mistake anyone could make. I stood up, thanked them again profusely, and hurried out of the coffee shop, leaving them alone with their victory and my hidden listening phone. I walked out the door and didn't look back. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was the thrill of the hunt. I got into my car and drove to the corner of the block just out of sight. I had the bait and they had taken it. Now, I just had to wait and listen, hoping they were stupid enough to hand me the final nail for their own coffin. I waited in my car for 15 agonizing minutes, my eyes fixed on the coffee shop's front door. Finally, I saw them emerge, laughing and smiling. Arthur put his arm around Joyce, and they walked down the street looking like the happiest couple in the world. I gave it another minute before I went back inside. I walked to the booth, my heart hammering. "Oh, thank goodness," I said to a passing waitress, pointing. "I think I left my phone." I grabbed it, went back to my car, and drove away, my hands shaking. I parked in a quiet spot a few blocks away. I took a deep breath, opened the recorder app, and hit play. For a few seconds, all I heard was the clatter of cups and background chatter. Then came Arthur's voice, loud and clear. "Can you believe that old hag?" he boomed, followed by a peal of laughter from his wife. "Hook, line, and sinker." Joyce's voice dripped with venom. "Did you see that sad little blouse she was wearing? Pathetic. And her face when you talked about the numbers. She didn't understand a single word." They went on, mocking my clothes, my supposed stupidity, my embarrassing job. Every word was a fresh wound, but I couldn't stop listening. The part that made my blood run cold was when Arthur said, "And that son of hers, he's just as dumb as she is. A fool in a good suit." They weren't just insulting me, and they were just getting started. After they were finished laughing at my expense, their tone shifted. It became quiet, serious and conspiratorial. This was the part I was waiting for. "So, the 250,000 will clear our debt with Johnson," Arthur said, his voice low, "and it will give us enough to put the deposit down on the house in Arizona. We can be out of here in a month." Arizona. They were planning to run. "And David?" Joyce asked. "What about him?" "That's Tiffany's department," Arthur replied smoothly. "Once we're settled, she'll start working on him. A better job opportunity, a new start, whatever it takes. The goal is to get him out there with us within 6 months, away from his mother's influence." Then came the final brutal twist from Joyce. "And once he's there," she said, her voice like ice, "Tiffany can finally convince him to cut that old bat off for good. No more phone calls, no more visits, no more of her precious grandbabies. We'll be a real family finally. She'll just be a bad memory. It wasn't just a scam to get my money. It was a strategy for my complete and total erasure from my own son's life. I finally hit stop. I had the weapon. Now I just needed to choose the right moment to fire it. I went home and listened to the recording again. This time I wasn't listening with the ears of a wounded mother. I was listening with the ears of a CEO looking for the kill shot. The insults and the grand plan were damning, but I needed something that tied it all together, something that put Tiffany squarely at the center of the conspiracy. And then I heard it, a line from Arthur I had almost missed. "It's a good thing Tiffany is so organized," he'd said with a chuckle. "She confirmed it all in her email this morning. The new bank accounts are set up and ready for the wire transfer. She's a smart girl, our Tiffany, always gets things in writing." There it was. Tiffany wasn't just a manipulative brat who had gone along with her parents' plan. She was an active, willing co-conspirator. She was the one handling the mechanics of the theft. The mention of an email, a digital footprint leading directly to her, was the final piece of the puzzle. The web wasn't just around her parents, it was around all of them, and Tiffany was the spider sitting in the center. I saved a copy of the audio file to a secure drive. I looked at the calendar on my wall. David and Tiffany's 1-month wedding anniversary was just a few days away. I knew then that their celebration was about to become my stage. In the few quiet days before their anniversary, I didn't just wait. I studied. I went over Frank's report again, not looking at the finances, but at the timeline. That's when I saw it. The final, most painful piece of the puzzle. Tiffany had met my son, David, just 2 months after her family's final business had collapsed, and the last of their creditors had filed a lawsuit. She hadn't stumbled into his life. She had hunted him down. The whole story clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They had researched him. They saw a kind, successful young man with no father and a widowed mother who worked a simple, low-profile job. We were the perfect marks. Not wealthy enough to have lawyers and accountants scrutinizing their every move, but successful enough to have a substantial nest egg they could steal. The whirlwind romance, the rushed engagement, the perfect wedding. It was a corporate takeover disguised as a love story. My son wasn't a husband. He was an asset they were acquiring. His kind, trusting heart wasn't something Tiffany loved. It was a vulnerability she had exploited. This knowledge changed everything. It extinguished the last spark of pity I might have had for them. This was no longer just about saving my son, it was about delivering justice. And I was going to be the judge, jury, and executioner. The day of the anniversary arrived. I found out about the celebration the way they intended for the world to find out, from Tiffany's social media. She posted a photo of herself and David, all smiles, with a caption, "1 month with my amazing husband, celebrating our forever love tonight at the Onyx Room." It was a place known for its exclusivity and outrageous prices, a perfect stage for her charade, a perfect stage for mine. I did not dress like a cleaning woman. I went to the back of my closet and pulled out a dark, charcoal grey pantsuit I hadn't worn in years, one I'd bought for a business awards ceremony. It was a suit that silently screamed power and money. I put on the diamond earrings my late husband had given me and pulled my hair back in a severe, elegant bun. The woman who looked back at me in the mirror was not a victim. She was a CEO. Into my designer handbag, another relic from a past life, I placed my weapons. The signed promissory note, a 1-page summary of Frank's financial report, and a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker, already paired to the phone in my pocket containing the audio file. I arrived at the restaurant and gave my name to the host. I could hear their laughter through the frosted glass doors of the private dining room. I took one deep breath, straightened my jacket, and pulled open the door. Showtime. The laughter in the room stopped as if a switch had been flipped. 8 pairs of eyes. David, Tiffany, her parents, and 4 of their friends, all turned to look at me, frozen in surprise. Tiffany was in the middle of raising a champagne glass for a toast, and her perfect smile curdled into a mask of pure rage. Arthur and Joyce Miller turned pale, looking as if they had seen a ghost, but my focus was on my son. David's face was a storm of shock, anger, and, for a fleeting second, a deep, unmistakable guilt. Tiffany recovered first, her voice sharp and brittle as ice. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "I told you, you are not welcome. Security." I ignored her completely, my eyes still locked on my son. I gave a small, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Hello, David, Tiffany, Arthur, Joyce," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily across the silent room. "Please don't stop on my account. I'm not here to ruin your celebration." I took a slow, deliberate step toward their long, elegant table. "In fact," I said, reaching into my handbag, "I'm here to contribute. I've brought gifts." With that, I pulled out the first item, the single folded piece of paper Arthur had signed. I placed it on the pristine white tablecloth directly in front of him. "Let's start with this, shall we?"